"How's the quarterly report coming along, Sarah?" Richard asked, strolling into my office without knocking. His casual demeanor couldn't mask the manila envelope tucked under his arm. After 12 years and 4 months of growing his company from a struggling startup to an industry leader, I recognized the signs. Someone was being let go today. I just never imagined it would be me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Preston, and until that Friday afternoon, in October, I was the Chief Operations Officer at Horizon Digital Marketing. For over 12 years, I had dedicated my professional life to transforming a 6-person digital marketing agency operating out of a converted warehouse into a powerhouse, with over 200 employees and a client roster that included Fortune 500 companies. I first met Richard Blackwood when I was 32, working as a mid-level project manager at a competing agency. He approached me after a marketing conference where I'd presented on operational efficiency in creative environments. Richard was different then, hungry, visionary, and refreshingly honest about his limitations. "I'm good at sales and client relationships," he told me over coffee. "But I need someone who can build the infrastructure to deliver what I promise. Everyone says, that's you." The offer he made was modest, but included substantial equity. 5% of a company that was barely breaking even. What sealed the deal wasn't the potential financial upside, but Richard's vision. Creating a values-driven agency that delivered exceptional results while treating both clients and employees with integrity. "We'll build something that matters," he promised, his eyes bright with conviction. "Something we can be proud of." For the first 7 years, we were inseparable allies. I systematized our operations, developed our project management methodology, created our hiring protocols, and designed our company culture. Richard brought in the clients and articulated our vision to the world. We complemented each other perfectly, his charismatic external focus balanced by my methodical internal one. The transformation didn't happen overnight. The first 2 years were grueling, with 18-hour days and constant financial precarity. I postponed starting a family, withdrew from most social connections, and poured every ounce of my creativity and intelligence into building Horizon. Richard did the same, and our shared sacrifice created a bond that felt unbreakable. By year 5, we had 40 employees and a reputation for excellence that was generating consistent referrals. By year 7, we had expanded to a second office in Chicago and were being featured in industry publications as a case study in sustainable growth. The morning we signed our first truly massive client, a household name in consumer electronics, Richard hugged me in the lobby and said, "We did it, Sarah. This is what we dreamed about." The change began slowly, almost imperceptibly, as we crossed the threshold from scrappy underdog to established player. New executives joined our leadership team, bringing experience from larger organizations, but lacking the emotional investment in our founding vision. Board meetings, once focused on client success stories and employee development, gradually shifted toward EBITDA, market position, and potential exit strategies. Richard changed too. The industry recognition he'd long craved finally arrived. Speaking, invitations at prestigious conferences, profiles in business magazines, awards celebrating his visionary leadership. I was genuinely happy for him, proud to see his talents acknowledged. What I failed to recognize was how that recognition was reshaping his perception of who had built Horizon's success. In my role as COO, I remained largely behind the scenes, focused on the operational excellence that had become our competitive advantage. My team expanded from 3 to 35, and I developed a reputation as a demanding but fair leader who elevated those around her. While Richard became the face of Horizon, I became its backbone, less visible but essential to its continued functioning. The first clear indication of our diverging paths came during the company's 10th anniversary celebration. Richard gave an impassioned speech about Horizon's journey, chronicling his sleepless nights and bold decisions. My contribution was acknowledged, in a single sentence, grouped with other early team members who had helped execute his vision. Several employees who knew our shared history glanced at me uncomfortably, but I maintained a gracious smile, telling myself that public recognition wasn't what motivated me anyway. More concerning was the gradual shift in our strategic discussions. Decisions that we once would have made together after thoughtful debate were increasingly presented to me as finalized plans requiring implementation. When I raised concerns, particularly about changes that compromised our once sacred company values, Richard would listen politely before explaining why market realities made such compromises necessary. "We're not a startup anymore, Sarah," became his standard response. "What got us here won't get us where we need to go." Despite these tensions, I remained deeply committed to Horizon. The company was my professional legacy, and many of the people I'd hired and mentored had become like family. I still believed in what we could be, even as I worried about what we were becoming. As my influence with Richard diminished, I focused increasingly on developing the next generation of leadership within my department. Lisa Chen, who had started as my executive assistant 7 years earlier, had grown into a brilliant operations director with unique insights into both our technical systems and our company culture. Carlos Rodriguez, whom I'd recruited from a competitor 4 years ago, had revolutionized our project management approach. Together with 5 other key team members, they formed what I privately considered the company's operational brain trust, the people who translated Horizon's promises into reality. My relationship with Richard, meanwhile, had evolved from partnership to a more traditional executive reporting structure. Our casual drop-ins gave way to scheduled meetings. Our passionate debates about company direction were replaced by formal presentations and polite acknowledgments. The friendship that had once defined our working relationship cooled into professional courtesy. This shift coincided with the arrival of Marcus Davidson, brought in as Chief Strategy Officer 18 months ago from a multinational agency. Marcus was everything Richard increasingly seemed to value: polished, pedigreed, and plugged into elite business networks. His strategies emphasized scalability, acquisition potential, and margin improvement, often at the expense of the client, experience and employee development initiatives I had championed. In meetings, Marcus would refer to my operational approach as artisanal, a term that managed to simultaneously acknowledge its quality while implying its obsolescence. "Sarah has built a beautiful custom machine," he would say, "but we need to transition to industrial-scale production." Richard, once my staunchest defender, now nodded along with such assessments. Still, I adapted. I led the implementation of the new project management system Marcus advocated, despite my reservations about its impact on our creative process. I restructured my team to align with the new departmental organization Richard approved. I even revised our onboarding processes to emphasize efficiency over the deeper cultural integration I believed in. My responsibility, as I saw it, was to execute leadership's vision to the best of my ability, even when I disagreed with the direction. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that these compromises would prove insufficient, that behind closed doors, a different narrative about my role was taking shape. That Richard, the man who had once called me the heart of Horizon, was concluding that the company's future required a different kind of operational leadership. That Marcus Davidson was positioning himself not just as the architect of Horizon's strategy, but as the curator of its leadership team. So when Richard appeared in my doorway that Friday afternoon, manila envelope in hand, I should have been prepared. The signs had been there for anyone willing to see them. But 12 years of loyalty and shared history had clouded my judgment, left me vulnerable to the shock that was about to upend my professional life and set in motion a chain of events that neither Richard nor I could have anticipated. "How's the quarterly report coming along, Sarah?" he asked, his voice carrying a forced casualness that immediately set off alarm bells. After more than a decade of reading his moods and mannerisms, I knew something was wrong. "Just finished the executive summary," I replied, gesturing to my monitor. The operations team exceeded efficiency targets by 12% while maintaining our quality scores. Best quarter on record, actually. Richard nodded absently, not even glancing at the screen. He closed my office door, something he rarely did, and took a seat across from my desk. "We need to talk about the future of operations at Horizon," he said, placing the envelope on my desk. "About your future." "About my future?" I repeated, my mind racing to interpret Richard's unusual demeanor. For a moment, I thought he might be preparing to discuss succession planning, or perhaps a restructuring that would affect my department. Richard cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the window behind me rather than meeting my gaze. "The board and I have been evaluating our organizational structure as we prepare for the next growth phase." He paused, tapping his fingers on the envelope. "We've determined that Horizon needs a different type of operational leadership moving forward." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning crystallized. This wasn't a restructuring discussion. This was a termination. "You're letting me go," I stated, my voice steadier than I felt. 12 years of building this company, of sacrificing weekends and holidays, of postponing personal milestones for Horizon's success, and it was ending in a 10-minute conversation with a man who couldn't even maintain eye contact. Richard nodded, finally looking at me with an expression carefully calibrated to convey regret without actual emotional involvement. "Your contribution to Horizon has been significant, Sarah. No one can deny that. But the company's needs have evolved. We're bringing in someone with multinational experience to standardize our operations across markets." "Someone Marcus recommended, I assume?" The question slipped out before I could filter it, a rare crack in my professional composure. Richard's slight flinch confirmed my suspicion. "Brian Taylor starts next month. He's coming from Omnicom with extensive experience scaling operations for global agencies." He slid the envelope toward me. "Your severance package is generous. 6 months salary, extended health benefits, and accelerated vesting of your stock options. The board recognizes your years of service." I didn't touch the envelope. "And my team?" "Will report to Marcus during the transition," Richard replied quickly, clearly relieved to discuss logistics rather than justification. "Once Brian is settled, he'll evaluate the department structure." The implication was clear. My carefully assembled team, the operational brain trust I had nurtured and developed, would likely be dismantled under the new leadership. The thought of Lisa, Carlos, and the others being displaced or marginalized stung even more than my own. Termination. "When?" I asked simply. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Today will be your last day," Richard said, glancing at his watch. "HR is preparing your exit paperwork. For continuity, we're announcing that you've decided to pursue other opportunities after helping build Horizon's operational foundation." The carefully constructed narrative reflected Richard's long-standing talent for shaping perception. I would be portrayed not as rejected leadership, but as a builder who had completed her task and chosen to move on. A fiction designed to serve Horizon's reputation rather than acknowledge the reality of my dismissal. "I see," I said, my mind suddenly shifting from shock to rapid analysis. "And my equity position?" Richard seemed relieved by the practical question. "As outlined in the agreement, you'll retain the 5% founding equity, fully vested. Now, the additional performance shares will vest on the standard schedule. At current valuation, it's a significant package, Sarah." He was offering money in place of recognition, compensation instead of appreciation. After 12 years of partnership, my contribution was being reduced to a financial calculation. a liability to be settled rather than a legacy to be honored. "I'll need time to review the agreement with my attorney," I said, finally taking the envelope but not opening it. Richard frowned slightly. "The terms are standard and quite favorable. The board would appreciate your signature by Monday." "I'm sure they would," I replied, maintaining my composure through practiced professional discipline. "But given that today is my last day after 12 years of service, I'll take the appropriate time to ensure my interests are protected. I'm sure the board can understand that perspective." Richard stood, recognizing the implicit rejection of his timeline. "Jennifer from HR will be up shortly to walk you through the exit process." He hesitated at the door, perhaps searching for some final words that might ease his discomfort. For what it's worth, this wasn't an easy decision. I looked directly at him, allowing myself one moment of unvarnished honesty. It should have been harder. After he left, I sat motionless, absorbing the seismic shift in my professional reality. 12 years of my life, thousands of hours of intellectual and emotional investment, relationships built and nurtured, all suddenly relegated to past experience. The shock was physical, a hollowness in my chest expanding until breathing required conscious effort. Jennifer's arrival interrupted my processing. Unlike Richard, her discomfort was genuine, her eyes reflecting the awkwardness of facilitating the departure of an executive she had known and respected since joining Horizon 4 years ago. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," she whispered as she handed me a tablet with exit forms queued up for electronic signature. "Not your doing," I assured her, appreciating her humanity in a moment otherwise defined by corporate coldness. "Just part of the business." As we worked through the procedural requirements, my office phone rang twice. Calls from Lisa and Carlos that I let go to voicemail. News traveled quickly in organizations, particularly bad news. I wasn't ready to navigate those conversations, while still processing my own emotional response. Jennifer produced a cardboard box, that universal symbol of corporate dismissal, and hovered uncertainly as I considered what to take. After 12 years, surprisingly little felt essential. I selected a few personal photographs, a crafted wooden box that my team had given me for my 10th anniversary with the company, and a small collection of handwritten thank you notes from employees whose careers I had championed. "Your laptop and company phone," Jennifer prompted gently. I nodded, disconnecting them from their docking stations. 12 years of emails, presentations, strategy documents, and operational plans, all company property, all remaining behind. While I walked out the door, the intellectual capital I had created would fuel Horizon's future without me. As Jennifer prepared to escort me to the exit, my office door opened again. Lisa Chen stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of disbelief and determination. "Is it true?" she asked, looking from me to Jennifer and back again. "Lisa, this isn't a good time," Jennifer began, clearly uncomfortable with the protocol breach. "It's fine," I interjected. "Yes, Lisa, it's true. Today is my last day at Horizon. Richard can fill you in on the transition plan." Lisa stepped fully into the office, closing the door behind her despite Jennifer's obvious disapproval. "This is wrong," she said flatly. "The operations department is your creation. The systems we use, the processes we follow, the culture we've built, it's all you, Sarah." The loyalty touched me, but I recognized the potential impact on Lisa's own position. "I appreciate that, but this is a leadership decision that's been made. What matters now is continuity for the team and our clients." "That's corporate speak," Lisa challenged, uncharacteristically direct. "You taught us to value authenticity and honesty, and now you're falling back on approved messaging?" Her words pierced the professional armor I'd automatically deployed. She was right. I was hiding behind polished phrases rather than acknowledging the human reality of the situation. "You're right," I conceded. This isn't how I would have chosen to end my time at Horizon, but my personal disappointment doesn't change the reality or the responsibility we all have to the work we do. Lisa stepped closer, lowering her voice. The team is meeting tonight at Riverfront Brewing, 7U. We'd like you to join us. She glanced at Jennifer, then back to me. For closure, if nothing else. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. Sarah is technically restricted from discussing company matters with employees after separation. We're also friends, Lisa pointed out, unless Richard plans to regulate Sarah's personal relationships too. The small act of defiance, of human connection asserting itself against corporate protocol, was unexpectedly moving. For the first time since Richard had entered my office with that envelope, I felt something other than shock and professional disappointment. I felt valued. I'll think about it, I said, knowing that I would go, knowing that I needed that connection as much as they apparently did. As Jennifer finally escorted me through the office toward the elevator, I noticed the reactions of employees. We passed. Some averted their eyes, uncomfortable with witnessing a senior leader's departure. Others made deliberate eye contact, offering small nods or subtle expressions of support. A few seemed genuinely shocked, whispering to colleagues as we passed. The most telling reaction came from Marcus Davidson, who emerged from the conference room just as we reached the elevators. His expression, carefully schooled into professional neutrality, couldn't quite hide the satisfaction in his eyes. The obstacle to his vision for Horizon was being removed, the path cleared for his influence to expand. Sarah, he acknowledged with a nod that managed to be simultaneously polite and dismissive. Marcus, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. I wish you success with Horizon's future. It wasn't what I wanted to say. What I wanted was to question his integrity, to challenge his vision, to defend the operational philosophy he had systematically undermined. But such emotionalism would serve no purpose except to validate the narrative he had likely constructed about my unsuitability for Horizon's next chapter. Instead, I maintained my dignity as the elevator doors closed, marking the physical end of my 12-year journey with Horizon Digital Marketing. As the building receded through the rear window of my Uber, I allowed myself one backward glance at the company I had helped build from nothing, my professional home for more than a decade. Now suddenly foreign territory. The driver, sensing my mood, remained silent as we navigated through downtown toward my condo. I used the quiet to begin processing, to move beyond the immediate shock toward the analytical thinking that had always been my strength. By the time we arrived at my building, one thing had become increasingly clear. Richard's decision wasn't just a professional miscalculation. It was a catalyst for something new, something I couldn't yet define but could begin to imagine. My condo had never felt so quiet. For 12 years, I had treated it primarily as a place to sleep between long workdays at Horizon. Now, at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, I found myself standing in my living room with nowhere to be, no urgent emails to answer, no team members seeking guidance, no clients requiring attention. The disorientation was profound. I placed the small box of personal items on my kitchen counter and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that had been the apartment's main selling point. The view of the river had always provided a sense of perspective during rare moments of leisure. Today, it felt like looking at my future, a moving expanse of unknown possibilities flowing inexorably forward. I had just poured myself a glass of wine when my phone rang. Caller ID showed Lisa Chen, likely calling to confirm my attendance at the evening gathering. Instead, I found myself listening to 6 of my core team members on speakerphone, all apparently huddled in the small wellness room on our floor, the only space without glass walls or potential managerial oversight. Sarah, we've just been told you resigned to pursue other opportunities, Carlos began, his tone making clear what he thought of that explanation. Marcus called an emergency operations meeting 20 minutes after you left. He already announced your replacement, added Tanya from financial operations. Some corporate efficiency expert from Omnicom named Brian Taylor. And he made it clear that a standardization initiative is coming, Lisa continued. He used phrases like eliminating redundancies and streamlining legacy processes. Everyone knows what that means. The speed of these developments surprised even me. Richard and Marcus weren't wasting any time dismantling what I had built. The realization crystallized something within me, a clarifying anger replacing the initial shock. What did he say about immediate reporting structure? I asked, professional instinct taking over despite my personal feelings. All department heads now report directly to Marcus until Brian arrives in 4 weeks, Carlos explained. And Marcus has already requested access to all our process documentation and system architectures. Of course he had. Marcus was smart. Enough to know that the operational frameworks I had developed over a decade were valuable intellectual capital. He wanted them documented and preserved before making any personnel changes that might result in knowledge loss. Listen to me, I said, my voice finding a firmness that reflected my emerging resolve. Each of you has tremendous value beyond Horizon. You've developed expertise and capabilities that would be prized by any organization intelligent enough to recognize them. Whatever decisions you make in the coming weeks should prioritize your own professional growth, not loyalty to systems that may soon be dismantled. We're not calling about our career options, Lisa interjected. We're calling because what's happening is wrong. They're throwing away years of operational excellence for some standardized corporate approach that treats creative work like widget manufacturing. Her passion reflected exactly what I had tried to instill in my team, a belief that operational systems in creative environments required specialized approaches that balanced efficiency with the unpredictable nature of innovation. It was the philosophy that had differentiated Horizon from competitors who treated creative work as a purely linear process. I appreciate your loyalty, I replied carefully, but Richard and the board have made their decision. They're entitled to determine Horizon's direction, even if we disagree with it. So you're just accepting this? Tanya asked, disappointment evident in her voice. After everything you've built? The question struck a nerve. Was I just accepting it? The professional part of me, the part that had always privileged organizational needs above personal ones, said yes. That was the mature response. But another voice was emerging, one that questioned whether such acceptance was genuinely in Horizon's best interest, or merely the path of least resistance. I'm processing it, I answered honestly. Right now, I'm focused on ensuring my departure doesn't create unnecessary disruption for our clients or team members. Beyond that, I'll need time to determine my next steps. Carlos's voice lowered. Marcus is already talking about sunsetting the Maxwell account service structure you designed. He called it excessively customized and inefficient from a resource allocation perspective. The Maxwell account was Horizon's largest client, a global consumer electronics brand that had specific operational requirements due to their complex approval processes. The custom service structure I had designed had been instrumental in winning and retaining their business, a fact apparently lost on Marcus in his pursuit of standardization. That would be a significant mistake, I said, professional concern, overriding political caution. The Maxwell structure exists because of their unique organizational complexities. Forcing them into a standardized model will create friction points that competitors will exploit. We know that, Lisa replied. We've tried explaining it. Marcus says the client will adapt to our new delivery framework. The arrogance was breathtaking but not surprising. Marcus had always privileged theoretical efficiency over practical client realities, a perspective that worked well in boardroom presentations, but often failed in actual client relationships. Document your concerns through official channels, I advised. falling back on corporate protocol despite knowing its likely futility. Ensure there's a record of the potential risks being identified before implementation decisions are made. After a few more minutes of conversation, mostly focused on immediate tactical concerns, we ended the call with promises to connect at the evening gathering. As I placed my phone down, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in the team I had built, concern for Horizon's future direction, and a growing sense of personal resolve that was beginning to displace the initial shock of termination. My phone buzzed with a text message from Richard. Exit paperwork received. Legal reviewing your non-compete and confidentiality obligations. Please maintain discretion regarding internal operations during this transition. The message's clinical tone and implied monitoring of my activities further crystallized my emotional response. 12 years of partnership reduced to legal precautions and restrictive covenants. The Richard who had once shared late-night pizza while we worked through operational challenges was now communicating through carefully crafted text messages that had likely been reviewed by legal counsel. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my laptop, my personal laptop, not the company-issued one now back in Horizon's possession, and created a new document. At the top, I typed, "Next chapter, Strategic Assessment." For the next 2 hours, I methodically documented my professional assets: skills developed, networks established, knowledge acquired, and results achieved over my 12 years at Horizon. I created sections for immediate financial considerations, short-term professional options, and longer-term strategic possibilities. The exercise was partly practical, a necessary inventory of my professional capital as I faced unexpected career transition, but also psychological. It shifted my focus from what had been taken from me to what I still possessed. With each capability listed, each achievement documented, my sense of professional identity began to reconstitute itself separate from my Horizon title. By the time I needed to prepare for the evening gathering with my team, I had filled 12 pages with detailed notes, potential opportunities, and preliminary action items. The document would need refinement, but it had accomplished its primary purpose, transforming me from passive recipient of Richard's decision to active architect of my response. I chose my outfit for the evening carefully: professional but not formal, approachable but still polished. This would be my first appearance, as a former Horizon executive rather than a current one. How I presented myself, what I said, and perhaps more importantly what I didn't say, would establish the tone for my post-Horizon professional identity. Riverfront Brewing was buzzing with Friday evening energy when I arrived. The operations team had claimed a private area in the back, partially screened from the main space by decorative dividers. Seeing them gathered outside the office context, 11 professionals whose careers I had influenced to varying degrees, brought an unexpected tightness to my throat. Lisa spotted me first, rising to greet me with an embrace that communicated more than words could have. One by one, team members offered similar welcomes, some verbal, some physical, all genuine. Their support was a tangible reminder that while Richard could terminate my employment, he couldn't erase the relationships I had built or the impact I had made. "We ordered your usual," Carlos said, sliding a cocktail toward me as I took a seat. "And we've established one rule for tonight: no one asks what's next unless you want to discuss it." The thoughtfulness behind this simple boundary reflected exactly what I had tried to cultivate in our department: emotional intelligence alongside operational excellence. I raised my glass in acknowledgement. "I appreciate that," I said, looking around the table. "And I appreciate all of you making time for this impromptu gathering. It means more than you know." "It's the least we could do," Tanya replied, "given everything you've done for us." For the next hour, conversation flowed naturally, sometimes touching on work matters, but more often exploring personal connections that had developed alongside our professional ones. I learned about weekend plans, family updates, and personal projects that often went unmentioned in our task-focused office interactions. As the initial awkwardness faded and the second round of drinks arrived, Carlos leaned forward, his expression turning more serious. "None of us is asking what's next for you," he said, glancing around to confirm group consensus. "But many of us are wondering what's next for us. With your perspective removed from Horizon's leadership, the operational vision seems unclear." This was delicate territory. Anything I said that could be construed as undermining Horizon's new leadership or encouraging staff departures could potentially violate separation agreements or trigger legal complications. Yet these were professionals seeking genuine guidance during organizational uncertainty, people I had mentored and led for years. "Change creates both challenge and opportunity," I began carefully. "Horizon is evolving, and that evolution will suit some career paths better than others. The question each of you needs to consider is whether the emerging direction aligns with your professional values and growth objectives." "That's very diplomatic," Lisa observed with a slight smile. "Are you allowed to be more direct, or is that corporate lawyer language required by your exit agreement?" The question broke the tension, generating appreciative laughter around the table. Even I smiled, recognizing the absurdity of measuring my words so carefully with people I had worked alongside for years. "Let's just say I'm being appropriately cautious while still adjusting to my new circumstances," I replied, matching her tone. "But what I can say without reservation is that each of you has contributed to building something remarkable at Horizon. Whatever direction leadership takes now, that contribution remains valuable, both to the company and to your own professional narrative." As the evening continued, I noticed a subtle shift in the conversation's emotional texture. What had begun as a gathering tinged with sympathetic support for my situation was evolving into something more complex and empowering. We were, collectively, moving beyond the simple narrative of termination toward a more nuanced understanding of professional identity and agency. When I finally prepared to leave around 9:30, the goodbyes carried a different quality than I had anticipated. Rather than feeling like endings, they somehow felt like beginnings, acknowledgments of shifting relationships rather than severed ones. The team was already planning a follow-up dinner for the following month, explicitly including me in those plans despite my changed status. Walking to my car, I reflected on this unexpected outcome. Richard had removed me from Horizon's organizational chart, but he couldn't remove me from the professional community I had helped cultivate. The relationships, respect, and knowledge remained intact, representing a form of professional capital independent of corporate authorization. For the first time since receiving that manila envelope, I felt something approaching optimism. Not because the termination didn't still sting. It did. But because I was beginning to recognize that my professional value existed beyond Horizon's willingness to compensate it. Whatever came next would build on foundations that remained solid. Despite the day's seismic shifts, as I drove home through the darkened city streets, one question began to crystallize in my mind. If my operational approach still had value, even as Horizon moved in a different direction, where might that value be better appreciated? The question wasn't just about finding another job. It was about identifying where the expertise I had developed could have the greatest impact. The seed of an idea was beginning to form, one that would soon grow into something neither Richard nor I could have anticipated when he walked into my office that afternoon. The weekend after my termination passed in an unusual state of limbo. For the first time in over a decade, I experienced 2 consecutive days without urgent work emails, client emergencies, or strategic planning for the week ahead. The sudden absence of professional demands created a strange vacuum, both liberating and disorienting. By Sunday evening, I had established a temporary structure to manage this new reality. My dining room table had transformed into a command center of sorts, with my laptop flanked by notebooks, financial documents, and industry publications. The wall calendar that had previously tracked personal appointments now displayed a new timeline. Key dates for financial decisions, professional networking events, and strategic milestones for what I was now calling my transition period. Monday morning arrived with its familiar energy, the city awakening to another work week. Out of habit, I prepared as if heading to the office. Early rise, morning run, professional attire. The routine provided a sense of continuity even as my destination had changed. Instead of Horizon's downtown headquarters, I directed my car toward the offices of Eleanor Winters, the attorney who had reviewed my separation agreement over the weekend. Eleanor's corner office offered commanding views of the city park, setting that reflected her status as one of the region's premier employment attorneys. At 62, she had built a reputation for tough but ethical representation, particularly for executives navigating complex separations from companies they had helped build. "The agreement is fairly standard in most respects," she began, referencing the document on her tablet. "The severance package is actually quite generous. 6-month salary, benefits continuation, and accelerated vesting of your performance shares. However, there are several provisions that warrant discussion." For the next hour, Eleanor methodically walked me through the legal implications of various clauses: non-compete restrictions, non-solicitation provisions, confidentiality requirements, and intellectual property assignments. Her analysis was precise but contextual, highlighting not just what was prohibited, but where gray areas existed. "The non-compete is broader than I'd typically advise a client to accept," she noted, highlighting a section on her screen. "It restricts you from working with any digital marketing agency serving clients in Horizon's market segments for 18 months. Given your specialized expertise and industry standing, that's potentially overly restrictive of your earning capacity." "Can we negotiate that provision?" I asked, making notes in my portfolio. "Certainly. I would recommend countering with 12 months and a narrower definition of competitive activities. The current language could be interpreted to prevent you from even consulting on operational matters for agencies serving similar clients." Eleanor continued her analysis, identifying several other provisions that seemed designed more to restrict my future options than to protect Horizon's legitimate business interests. By the time our meeting concluded, we had outlined a comprehensive response strategy, accepting certain provisions while proposing modifications to others. "I'll draft our response today," Eleanor assured me as we wrapped up. "But there's something else you should consider, Sarah. These terms suggest Horizon sees you as a competitive threat, not just a departing executive. That's actually rather complimentary, though I suspect it doesn't feel that way at the moment." Her observation lingered in my mind as I left her office. Richard and Marcus weren't just terminating an executive whose approach no longer aligned with their vision. They were actively working to constrain my future impact in the industry. The realization was simultaneously unsettling and affirming. They recognized my value enough to fear it. Throughout the remainder of the week, a pattern emerged. While Eleanor handled the legal negotiations with Horizon's counsel, I focused on methodically evaluating my professional options. I created detailed analyses of potential career paths, joining another agency in a senior role, transitioning to client-side marketing leadership, establishing an independent consultancy, or pursuing opportunities outside marketing entirely. Each option received careful consideration, evaluated against criteria including financial prospects, professional satisfaction, lifestyle implications, and growth potential. The exercise drew on the same analytical rigor I had applied to Horizon's operational challenges, but with a critical difference. For the first time in 12 years, I was applying that analytical framework exclusively to my own future rather than an organization's. Throughout this process, my phone regularly displayed messages from former colleagues. Some sought advice on navigating the changing environment at Horizon. Others shared updates on Marcus's evolving influence and the operational shifts already underway. A few simply checked on my well-being, maintaining the personal connections that had developed alongside our professional relationships. Lisa Chen's messages were the most frequent and substantive. As my former right hand in operations, she was experiencing the organizational transition most directly. Brian Taylor toured the department today, she texted on Wednesday. Spent 3 hours asking about process documentation and systems architecture. 0 questions about team capabilities or client-specific operational requirements. On Thursday, Marcus announced the Operational Standardization Initiative at the all-hands meeting. 4-phase implementation beginning next month. First target, the Maxwell account service structure. By Friday, the updates had grown more concerning. They've terminated our contract with Nexus Project Management Software, the system you customized for creative workflow management. Transitioning everyone to Marcus's preferred enterprise platform next quarter. Each message confirmed what I had suspected. Horizon was systematically dismantling the operational approach I had developed, replacing customized solutions with standardized processes regardless of their appropriateness for specific client needs or team workflows. The strategy reflected Marcus's fundamental belief that operational efficiency came from uniformity rather than tailored design. I maintained careful neutrality in my responses, offering support to Lisa personally while avoiding any commentary that could be construed as undermining Horizon's leadership decisions. The legal negotiations remained ongoing, and Eleanor had strongly advised against any communications that might complicate that process. By the following Monday, 10 days after my termination, Eleanor called with an update on the separation agreement negotiations. They've accepted most of our proposed modifications, she reported. The non-compete has been reduced to 12 months and narrowed to executive leadership roles at competing agencies. The non-solicitation still prevents recruiting Horizon employees for 18 months, but now excludes individuals who approach you without solicitation. And the intellectual property provisions? I asked, particularly concerned about clauses that seemed to claim ownership of operational methodologies I had developed. That's the interesting part, Eleanor replied. They've held firm on those provisions, specifically the language regarding all processes, methodologies, and systems developed during employment. They clearly value the operational frameworks you created and want to ensure they remain Horizon's property. The stance was both expected and revealing. Richard and Marcus recognized the value of what I had built. Even as they removed the builder, the irony wasn't lost on me. What do you recommend? I asked. The revised terms are generally acceptable from a legal perspective, Eleanor advised. The real question is whether you're comfortable with the restrictions they place on your future activities, particularly regarding your operational methodologies. It was ultimately a business decision rather than a legal one, weighing the immediate benefits of the severance package against the potential limitations on leveraging my expertise in future roles. After considering Eleanor's counsel, I authorized her to accept the revised agreement with minor clarifications. I'll submit our acceptance today, she confirmed. Assuming they approve our final clarifications, you should receive the severance payment within 5 to 7 business days. The resolution of the legal matters brought a measure of closure, but also intensified the question that had been forming since my termination. What next? With the separation agreement nearly finalized, I could now move beyond response mode into proactive planning for my professional future. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Jeremy Maxwell, founder and CEO of Maxwell Electronics, Horizon's largest client and the company whose account service structure was reportedly first on Marcus's standardization agenda. Sarah, he began without preamble when I answered. I've just come from a rather enlightening meeting with Richard and their new operations fellow, Brian something. Thought you might want to hear about it. Jeremy and I had developed a strong professional relationship over the 4 years Maxwell had been a Horizon client. He valued the custom operational structure I had designed to accommodate his company's complex approval processes and multiple product divisions. Our quarterly operational reviews had evolved from necessary business meetings to engaging discussions about efficiency in creative environments. "I'm all ears," I replied, careful to maintain professional neutrality despite my curiosity. "They presented their new standardized service model that they're implementing across all accounts," Jeremy explained, not bothering to hide his skepticism. When I asked how it would accommodate our specific workflow requirements, this Brian fellow told me, and I quote, "Our enhanced framework will provide superior efficiency once your team adapts to the new processes." I remained silent, knowing Jeremy well enough to recognize he wasn't finished. I reminded them that we selected Horizon specifically because of your operational approach, the customized workflow that accommodated our 8 separate product divisions and 32 approval stakeholders. Richard assured me the new model would provide comparable customization through standardized modules. The contradiction in that phrase, customization through standardization, perfectly captured Marcus's philosophical approach, prioritizing theoretical efficiency over practical effectiveness. "That sounds challenging," I offered neutrally. "It sounds like corporate doublespeak," Jeremy corrected bluntly. But here's where it gets interesting. When I expressed concerns about the transition timing, Richard mentioned they've retained all your documentation and process maps. Brian said, and again I'm quoting, "We have the architecture. We just need to standardize its implementation." The implication was clear. They were planning to adapt my custom approach into their standardized framework, essentially repackaging my work while dismissing the philosophy that had informed it. "Jeremy," I said carefully, "I appreciate you sharing this, but I should note that I've just finalized my separation agreement with Horizon. I'm not in a position to discuss their operational decisions or client relationships." "I understand completely," Jeremy replied. "I'm not calling to discuss Horizon. I'm calling to discuss Maxwell Electronics, specifically our marketing operations requirements going forward. We have some decisions to make, and I'd value your perspective, as an independent consultant, of course." The suggestion caught me off guard. Jeremy was clearly indicating interest in my services separate from Horizon, potentially creating a direct conflict with the non-compete provisions I had just negotiated. "That's a flattering suggestion," I acknowledged, "but my agreement includes certain restrictions on working with Horizon clients for the next 12 months. "Interesting," Jeremy said, his tone suggesting this information wasn't surprising. "Well, hypothetically speaking, if a company were no longer a Horizon client, would those restrictions still apply?" The question opened a door I hadn't previously considered. My non-compete restricted me from working with current Horizon clients, but not former ones. If Maxwell Electronics terminated their relationship with Horizon, the restriction technically wouldn't apply. "Hypothetically," I replied carefully, "the status of the client relationship at the time services commenced would be the relevant factor." "Excellent," Jeremy said. "In that case, I'd like to schedule a hypothetical discussion about hypothetical marketing operations needs for a hypothetical company that values customized workflows over standardized processes. Would tomorrow morning work for you?" As I ended the call after confirming the meeting details, I felt a shift in my perspective, a clarifying recognition that my professional value existed independently of Horizon's organizational chart or Richard's assessment. The operational expertise I had developed over 12 years remained relevant and valuable to those who understood its effectiveness, regardless of current industry trends towards standardization. This realization didn't eliminate the sting of Richard's rejection or the disappointment of seeing my work at Horizon potentially dismantled. But it offered something potentially more valuable, a glimpse of professional purpose that extended beyond my former role, and a pathway forward that built upon rather than discarded the expertise I had developed. For the first time since that manila envelope appeared on my desk, I felt genuinely curious about what might come next, not just as a necessary response to termination, but as a meaningful evolution of my professional journey. The modern glass, Building that housed Maxwell Electronics headquarters offered a stark contrast to Horizon's converted warehouse aesthetic. As I navigated the security protocols and rode the elevator to the executive floor, I reminded myself that this meeting with Jeremy Maxwell existed in a professional gray area. I needed to maintain ethical boundaries while exploring potential opportunities that wouldn't violate my separation agreement. Jeremy's corner office reflected his practical approach to business: functional furnishings, minimal decoration, and walls covered with product development timelines and market positioning charts. No design awards or industry recognition plaques, just the working tools of a CEO focused on results rather than recognition. "Sarah," he greeted me, rising from behind his desk. "Thank you for making time so quickly." "Of course," I replied, accepting his handshake. Though I should reiterate that I need to be careful about discussions involving Horizon's operations or client relationships. Jeremy nodded, gesturing toward a small conference table by the window. "Understood completely. Today I'd like to focus on Maxwell's marketing operations needs, independent of any agency relationships. Pure strategy, no implementation specifics." As we settled at the table, Jeremy's executive assistant brought coffee and then closed the door, leaving us in professional privacy. Jeremy activated the room's privacy screen, frosting the glass walls that separated his office from the executive corridor, a signal that our conversation warranted confidentiality. "Let me be direct," he began, stirring his coffee. "The operational structure you designed for our account at Horizon is the only reason we've remained a client for 4 years. Our previous 3 agencies failed because they couldn't manage our approval complexity without creating bottlenecks or quality issues." I acknowledged this with a nod, but remained silent, letting him continue. "When Richard informed us last week that they were implementing a standardized approach across all clients, I immediately raised concerns. The presentation yesterday confirmed those concerns weren't unfounded." Jeremy leaned forward. "They're dismantling your system without understanding why it works for our specific needs." "Agency approaches evolve," I offered neutrally. "What worked previously might not align with their current strategic direction." Jeremy gave me a knowing look. "Let's not play games, Sarah. We both know what's happening. The question is, what are Maxwell's options if Horizon can no longer provide the operational support we require?" The directness was refreshing after days of carefully measured communications with Horizon representatives and legal counsel. Still, I needed to proceed cautiously. "Speaking generally," I began, "companies in your position typically have 3 options: adapt to the agency's new approach, transition to another agency with compatible operations, or bring certain functions in-house for greater control." "And which would you recommend?" Jeremy asked directly. "That depends on several factors," I replied. "The specifics of your marketing needs, internal capabilities, budget considerations, and long-term strategic objectives." Jeremy sat back, studying me for a moment before reaching into a folder and sliding a document across the table. "This is our current marketing operations assessment. It details our internal capabilities, external dependencies, and operational pain points. Everything is covered by the NDA you signed when we began working together at Horizon, which remains in effect." I reviewed the document carefully. It outlined Maxwell's expanded marketing needs since becoming a Horizon client: new product categories, international market expansion, evolving digital channels. The complexity had increased significantly, making the custom operational approach I had designed even more critical to their success. "This is quite comprehensive," I noted, continuing to review the details. "Have you shared this assessment with Horizon?" "A version of it," Jeremy confirmed. Their response was that their new system could handle the complexity through modular standardization, whatever that means. As I studied the document further, something unexpected caught my attention: a section titled Internal Operations Development Initiative. It outlined a strategic plan for Maxwell to establish an in-house marketing operations department, reducing dependency on agency operational frameworks while maintaining creative partnerships for execution. "This is interesting," I said, pointing to the section. "You're considering building internal operations capabilities?" Jeremy nodded. "It's become increasingly clear that our operational needs are unique enough to warrant dedicated internal resources. The challenge is finding someone who understands both marketing operations and our specific organizational complexities." The implication hung in the air between us, unstated but unmistakable. I carefully considered my next words. Building internal operations from scratch would be a significant undertaking, I observed. The initial investment would be substantial, both financially and organizationally. "True," Jeremy agreed. "But the long-term benefits of operational control and continuity would likely offset those initial costs, particularly given our growth trajectory." We spent the next hour discussing Maxwell's operational requirements in abstract terms, the challenges of managing approval workflows across multiple divisions, the integration points between creative development and technical implementation, the metrics that would define operational success. Throughout the conversation, I maintained professional distance, offering insights based on general principles rather than specific recommendations. As our meeting neared its conclusion, Jeremy shifted to a more direct approach. "Here's where we stand, Sarah. We're initiating a review of our agency relationships, including Horizons. Simultaneously, we're accelerating our plans to develop internal marketing operations capabilities." I nodded, recognizing the strategic positioning. Maxwell was creating leverage with Horizon while developing alternatives. "I'd like to engage you as a consultant to advise on the development of our internal operations framework," Jeremy continued. "Not implementation, just strategic advisory services to help us design a structure that would meet our specific needs. This would be entirely separate from any agency relationships, past or present." The offer was carefully constructed to navigate around my non-compete restrictions while providing a legitimate opportunity to leverage my expertise. Still, I needed absolute clarity about the boundaries. "I appreciate the offer," I replied. "However, to ensure complete transparency, I should note that my separation agreement restricts me from providing services to current Horizon clients if those services are similar to what Horizon provides." "Understood," Jeremy said. "And if Maxwell were to terminate our relationship with Horizon?" "Then the restriction technically wouldn't apply," I confirmed, "though I would still need to be careful about using any proprietary Horizon methodologies or systems." Jeremy considered this for a moment. "The operational framework you designed for our account, would that be considered Horizon's proprietary system?" This was precisely the gray area that required careful navigation. The specific implementation for Maxwell was designed while I was employed by Horizon, so certain elements would be considered their intellectual property. However, the underlying operational principles and methodologies that informed that design derive from my broader professional expertise. "Meaning you could help us design a system based on those general principles without replicating Horizon's specific implementation," Jeremy clarified. "In theory, yes," I acknowledged, "but I would need to consult with my attorney to ensure any engagement remained within appropriate boundaries." Jeremy seemed satisfied with this response. "That's reasonable. Here's what I propose. I'll send you a formal consultancy request outlining the scope of advisory services we're interested in. You can review it with your attorney and let me know if and how we might proceed." As we concluded our meeting and I prepared to leave, Jeremy offered a final observation. "You know, Sarah, what I've always appreciated about working with you is that you see operations not as abstract efficiency metrics, but as the foundation of effective creative delivery. That perspective is surprisingly rare in our industry." The comment struck me as particularly meaningful coming from a client I had served for years. recognition of the philosophy that had informed my approach at Horizon, the same philosophy that Richard and Marcus were now discarding in favor of standardization. Driving home from the meeting, I found myself processing not just the potential opportunity with Maxwell, but the broader implications of Jeremy's interest. His willingness to consider rebuilding his marketing operations around my approach represented a powerful validation at a moment when my professional confidence had been shaken. The question now was whether such an engagement could be structured to comply with my legal obligations while still providing genuine value to Maxwell. I called Eleanor as soon as I arrived home, scheduling a meeting to discuss the legal parameters of the potential consultancy. Eleanor's measured analysis the following day provided both caution and possibility. The non-compete, specifically, restricts you from providing services to current Horizon clients that are similar to Horizon's offerings, she noted, reviewing the final agreement language. If Maxwell terminates their relationship with Horizon before engaging you, that restriction wouldn't apply. And the intellectual property provisions? I asked. Those are more nuanced, Eleanor acknowledged. You can't use Horizon's proprietary systems or methodologies. However, your general knowledge, expertise, and operational principles that you've developed throughout your career remain yours to apply. The line between proprietary methodologies and general expertise seems rather blurry, I observed. It is, Eleanor agreed, which is why I would recommend a very clear consultancy agreement that explicitly defines the scope of your services as advisory rather than implementation, focused on general operational principles rather than specific systems developed at Horizon. Her guidance provided a potential pathway forward, a carefully defined advisory role that would respect my legal obligations while allowing me to leverage my expertise in a new context. The next step would be reviewing Jeremy's formal proposal once it arrived. In the meantime, I continued receiving updates from former colleagues about the evolving situation at Horizon. Lisa's messages conveyed increasing frustration with the operational changes being implemented under Marcus's direction. First cross-functional issue meeting with the new approach, she texted that afternoon. 4 teams presenting conflicting timelines because the standardized template doesn't account for interdependencies. Took 2 hours to reconcile what your system managed automatically. Later that evening, Brian asked why we need client-specific operational dashboards, said standardized reporting would be more efficient for executive review. Completely missing the point that dashboards serve client workflow visibility, not just executive summaries. The updates confirmed my suspicions about the direction Horizon was taking, prioritizing internal standardization over client-specific effectiveness. It was a philosophically different approach to operations, one that prioritized theoretical efficiency over practical impact. When Jeremy's formal consultancy proposal arrived the following morning, its careful construction reflected his understanding of the legal complexities. The scope was explicitly limited to strategic advisory services for the development of internal marketing operations capabilities, with specific exclusions for any activities that might conflict with my separation agreement. After reviewing the document with Eleanor and making several clarifying amendments, I accepted the consultancy engagement. The initial term was 3 months, with a focus on assessing Maxwell's internal capabilities and developing recommendations for building an effective in-house operations framework. What began as a response to termination was evolving into something more intentional, an opportunity to apply my operational philosophy in a new context, unburdened by the constraints that had increasingly limited my impact at Horizon. While still navigating the emotional aftermath of Richard's decision, I found myself genuinely intrigued by the possibilities this new direction presented. As I finalized the agreement with Maxwell, Lisa texted with an update that gave the situation a new dimension. Just heard from Keith in business development. Maxwell put their account under review this morning, requested all current work to be completed but paused new projects. Richard called an emergency executive meeting. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Maxwell was clearly creating the conditions for a potential agency transition while simultaneously developing internal capabilities. While I had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries in my discussions with Jeremy, the strategic implications were undeniable. For a moment, I felt a twinge of concern for Horizon, the agency I had helped build over 12 years, whose success had been intertwined with my own professional identity for so long. The potential loss of their largest client would have significant implications for the company's finances and morale. But that concern was quickly balanced by a recognition of causal relationships. Richard and Marcus had made a strategic choice to prioritize standardization over customization. Despite knowing the importance of tailored operations to clients like Maxwell, that decision had consequences, just as Richard's decision to terminate me had created the conditions for my current opportunity. As I signed the consultancy agreement and emailed it back to Jeremy, I felt a sense of professional clarity that had been missing since receiving that manila envelope. While still processing the personal disappointment of rejection after 12 years of service, I was discovering that my professional value existed independently of Horizon's willingness to recognize it. The operational expertise I had developed, the ability to design systems that balanced efficiency with effectiveness, standardization with customization, remained valuable in the marketplace. Richard might have decided that approach no longer fit Horizon's vision, but other organizations still recognized its worth. With the Maxwell consultancy established and the separation agreement finalized, I found myself entering a new phase of my post-Horizon journey, moving from response to intention, from reaction to creation. The path forward remained uncertain, with many questions still unanswered, but for the first time since my termination, that uncertainty felt more like possibility than limitation. My consultancy with Maxwell Electronics began in earnest the following week. Jeremy had arranged a dedicated project room at their headquarters, complete with whiteboards covering the walls, secure network access, and a small team of internal stakeholders assigned to support the assessment phase. The space reflected Jeremy's commitment to the initiative, a tangible investment of resources that signaled institutional priority. My onboarding materials included comprehensive documentation of Maxwell's current marketing operations, workflow, diagrams, approval matrices, performance metrics, and stakeholder interviews conducted by their internal team. While much of this information was familiar from my work on their account at Horizon, reviewing it from this new perspective, as an advisor to Maxwell rather than an agency partner, revealed different patterns and possibilities. "We've prepared everything you requested," explained Melissa Zhang, Maxwell's VP of Marketing, who had been assigned as my primary internal contact. "The team is eager to begin. Jeremy has made it clear this initiative has top-level support." Melissa had always been my most engaged contact at Maxwell during my Horizon tenure, a marketing executive who understood the critical relationship between operational efficiency and creative effectiveness. Her assignment to this project suggested Jeremy was positioning internal champions who already appreciated the operational philosophy I had implemented through Horizon. "I appreciate the thorough preparation," I replied, reviewing the project schedule on the main whiteboard. "The 3-month timeline is ambitious but achievable if we maintain focus." "Jeremy doesn't believe in extended timelines," Melissa noted, with a smile. "He wants recommendations for our internal operations structure by the end of the assessment phase, with implementation planning to follow immediately." The urgency wasn't surprising. If Maxwell was indeed considering terminating their relationship with Horizon, they would need an alternative operational approach ready to deploy. The transition would be complex under any circumstances. Without proper planning, it could be disastrous for their marketing momentum. I spent the first 3 days conducting detailed interviews with stakeholders across Maxwell's marketing ecosystem: brand managers, creative directors, digital specialists, product marketers, and executives who participated in the approval process. The conversations revealed consistent themes about operational pain points and priorities, many of which I had addressed in the Custom Horizon framework, but which were now re-emerging as Marcus's standardization initiative took hold. The new templates don't account for our regional compliance requirements, explained Devin from Global Marketing. We're creating workarounds just to track necessary approvals. Timeline visibility has disappeared, added Kai from Product Marketing. Under the previous system, we could see how changes affected downstream deliverables. Now we're flying blind until something breaks. Resource allocation is becoming a nightmare, reported Jamie from Creative Services. The standardized briefing process doesn't capture project complexity accurately, so we're consistently understaffed on complex initiatives. These insights weren't merely complaints about change, they reflected material operational deficiencies that were already impacting Maxwell's marketing effectiveness. The standardization approach that Marcus had championed was creating exactly the friction points I had predicted when designing the custom system initially. By the end of the first week, I had compiled a comprehensive assessment of current operational challenges and begun developing preliminary recommendations for an internal structure that could address them. The work was engaging, drawing on my expertise while challenging me to apply it in a new context, designing capabilities within a client organization rather than an agency. On Friday afternoon, as I was finishing a working session with Melissa and 2 members of her team, my phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. Richard just called an all-hands meeting. Maxwell formally notified us they're terminating their contract, effective in 90 days. The news wasn't entirely unexpected given the trajectory of events, but its timing was significant. Maxwell had clearly coordinated their formal notice with the initiation of our consultancy work, creating a defined transition period that aligned with our project timeline. Melissa noticed my expression as I read the message. Everything okay? Yes, I replied, setting my phone aside. Just a personal matter. Shall we continue with the approval workflow mapping? We proceeded with our work, but the knowledge of Maxwell's formal notice added new context to our discussions. The 90-day transition window meant our recommendations wouldn't merely be theoretical, they would form the foundation for a major operational shift with substantial business implications. Later, that evening, after returning to my condo, I received a call from Jeremy. I assume you've heard that we've formally notified Horizon of our intent to terminate the relationship, he began without preamble. I'd heard something to that effect, I acknowledged carefully. I want to be completely transparent with you, Sarah. This decision wasn't made because of your consultancy with us. It was made because Horizon is no longer providing the operational support our business requires. I understand, I replied, and I appreciate your transparency. That said, Jeremy continued, the timing does create an opportunity. With the formal notice submitted, there are no longer any contractual complications regarding your consultancy. We'd like to expand the scope to include implementation planning in addition to the initial assessment and recommendations. The expanded scope represented both an opportunity and a challenge, a chance to design and implement a comprehensive operational system for Maxwell, but with accelerated timelines and heightened expectations. The stakes were significant for both Maxwell's marketing effectiveness and my own professional reputation in this new consulting capacity. I'd be open to discussing an expanded scope, I replied carefully. But we should be realistic about timelines and resource requirements. Building internal marketing operations capabilities is complex, especially during an agency transition. Period. Agreed, Jeremy said. I'll have legal prepare an amendment to our agreement reflecting the expanded scope and extended timeline. In the meantime, I'd like you to join a leadership briefing on Monday to update our executive team on initial findings. The leadership briefing would represent my first formal presentation in this new professional capacity, no longer an agency executive, but an independent consultant advising on strategic operational design. The transition felt significant, a tangible step in my evolving professional identity. Over the weekend, I prepared thoroughly for the presentation, developing a frame set that balanced analytical rigor with strategic clarity. The objective wasn't merely to impress Maxwell's leadership, but to establish a foundation of trust in my approach and capabilities. Monday's briefing took place in Maxwell's executive boardroom, with Jeremy and his senior leadership team present. As I presented my initial assessment and preliminary recommendations, I noted the shift in my own professional presence, the confidence that came from operating as an independent expert rather than an organizational representative. Based on our initial assessment, I explained, gesturing toward the projected workflow diagram, Maxwell's marketing operations requirements have 5 distinct characteristics that drive complexity: multi-regional compliance needs, fragmented approval authority, variable creative requirements across product lines, integrated campaign measurement, and accelerated market responsiveness. The executives nodded in recognition of these core challenges, the same factors that had made my custom operational approach at Horizon so valuable to them. Any effective operations system must address these 5 drivers, I continued. Our preliminary recommendation is to develop an internal operations function structured around these characteristics, rather than traditional marketing department divisions. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined a conceptual framework for Maxwell's internal operations, a hub-and-spoke model that would centralize core operational functions while embedding specialized operational support within each major marketing group. The approach would provide standardization where appropriate while maintaining necessary customization for specific business needs. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Jeremy's leadership team engaged deeply with the concepts, asking insightful questions that reflected their understanding of operational implications. The discussion evolved from a standard briefing into a collaborative design session, with executives building on the framework with their own insights and requirements. As the meeting concluded, Jeremy addressed the group with unmistakable satisfaction. This is exactly the approach we need: thoughtful, tailored to our specific requirements, and designed for our unique organizational structure. This is why we brought Sarah in to advise us. The validation was professionally gratifying, particularly coming just 10 days after Richard had deemed my operational approach no longer valuable to Horizon. The contrast couldn't have been more striking, one organization dismantling what I had built while another enthusiastically embraced the same underlying philosophy. As I packed up my materials after the meeting, Jeremy approached with a proposition that would significantly alter the trajectory of my post-Horizon journey. "Your presentation today confirmed what I already believed," he said. "Maxwell needs exactly the kind of operational thinking you provide. We'd like to discuss something beyond the current consultancy, a more permanent arrangement to lead our internal marketing operations once it's established." The suggestion caught me off guard. I had been focusing on the consultancy as a transitional engagement while exploring longer-term options, not as a potential pathway to an in-house role. "I'm flattered by your confidence," I replied, "but I haven't been considering permanent corporate positions at this stage." "I understand," Jeremy acknowledged, "but I'd ask you to consider it. We're prepared to create a senior position reporting directly to me, Chief Marketing Operations Officer. You would build the department from the ground up, with complete authority over structure, staffing, and systems. The compensation would reflect both the seniority and the strategic importance of the role." The offer was compelling, an opportunity to implement my operational philosophy with institutional support and resources, unrestricted by agency politics or conflicting strategic priorities. It represented a potential stability after the disruption of my Horizon termination, a chance to build something lasting rather than advising from the periphery. "This is certainly worth consideration," I conceded, "but my focus right now needs to be on delivering the current consultancy effectively. Perhaps we could revisit this conversation as we near completion of the project." Jeremy seemed satisfied with this approach. "Of course, focus on the assessment and recommendations. We'll have plenty of time to discuss longer-term arrangements as the project progresses." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the rapidly evolving situation. In just over 2 weeks, I had transitioned from the shock of termination to the beginning of a potentially significant new professional chapter. The consultant role provided immediate purpose and income, while Jeremy's unexpected job offer created a compelling option for longer-term stability. Yet another possibility was taking shape in my mind, one that had first emerged during my initial analysis after leaving Horizon, but had remained undeveloped as I focused on immediate needs. The work with Maxwell was revealing patterns about marketing operations that extended beyond their specific organization, patterns that suggested a broader market opportunity. Many companies faced similar operational challenges: increasing marketing complexity, fragmented approval processes, integrated campaign requirements, without access to sophisticated operational design. The standardized approaches offered by most agencies failed to address these unique organizational needs, while building internal capabilities required specialized expertise that few companies possessed. This gap between standardized agency offerings and complex client requirements represented a potential opportunity, not just for consultancy engagements like my current work with Maxwell, but for a specialized service model focused exclusively on marketing operations, design, and implementation. The concept was still forming, but its potential excited me in a way that even Jeremy's generous offer didn't fully match. Building a company focused on my operational philosophy would allow me to create not just a role, but an institutional approach to marketing operations, a legacy beyond any single client engagement or corporate position. For now, however, my priority remained delivering exceptional value to Maxwell through the consultancy. Their transition away from Horizon created both opportunity and responsibility, a chance to demonstrate the effectiveness of my approach while helping a valued client navigate a complex operational shift. As I settled at my dining room table that evening, reviewing notes from the executive briefing and planning the next phase of the assessment, my phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. An email from Richard Blackwood with the subject line, "Request to connect." After 2 weeks of silence following my termination, Richard was suddenly seeking contact. I hesitated before opening the message, uncertain of his intentions and unwilling to disrupt the professional momentum I was building. Eventually, curiosity prevailed. The message was brief but significant. "Sarah, I've just learned about Maxwell's decision. I believe we need to discuss the situation and potential paths forward. Are you available for coffee tomorrow?" Richard. The request represented a turning point, an acknowledgement that the consequences of my termination were materializing in ways Richard hadn't anticipated. Maxwell's decision had clearly triggered a reevaluation, though whether motivated by business concerns or personal recognition remained unclear. I closed the email without responding, deciding to let the request sit overnight while I considered the implications. Whatever Richard's intentions, the dynamics between us had fundamentally changed. I was no longer his employee or subordinate, but a professional navigating my own path, one that now intersected with Horizon's largest client at a critical juncture. How I chose to engage with Richard's outreach would set the tone for our future professional relationship. The decision merited careful consideration rather than reactive response, particularly as I continued developing my post-Horizon professional identity and direction. After a restless night considering Richard's unexpected outreach, I decided to meet him. Not from any sense of obligation or lingering loyalty, but from pragmatic curiosity. Understanding his perspective might provide valuable insights as I navigated my evolving relationship with Maxwell and planned my professional future. I suggested the Arbor, a quiet cafe several blocks from Horizon's offices, neutral territory where we were unlikely to encounter either his current employees or my former colleagues. When I arrived precisely at 9 a.m., Richard was already seated at a corner table, 2 coffee cups waiting. Some habits remained unchanged. He had always prided himself on anticipating preferences. "Sarah," he said, rising as I approached. His attempt at a warm smile didn't reach his eyes, which instead revealed a mixture of calculation and unease. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Professional courtesy," I replied simply, taking the seat across from him. Richard nodded, acknowledging the deliberate distance in my tone. "I appreciate it nonetheless." He took a measured sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I wanted to discuss Maxwell's decision to terminate their contract with Horizon. It's come as something of a surprise to our leadership team." The statement was so blatantly disingenuous that I nearly laughed. Maxwell had been expressing concerns about the standardization initiative since its announcement. Their decision to terminate the relationship was the natural consequence of Horizon's strategic shift, a shift Richard had personally championed. "Is it really surprising?" I asked evenly. "Maxwell selected Horizon specifically for the custom operational approach we designed for them. When you decided to dismantle that approach in favor of standardization, you created a fundamental misalignment with their requirements." Richard's expression tightened momentarily before settling back into practiced neutrality. "Our standardization initiative is designed to improve efficiency across all client relationships. The Maxwell system was brilliant but resource-intensive and difficult to scale." "It was designed that way intentionally," I pointed out. "Their marketing operation has 8 product divisions and 32 approval stakeholders across multiple regulatory environments. Standardization may work for simpler client structures, but Maxwell's complexity requires customization." Richard nodded slightly, conceding the point. "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you. The board is concerned about Maxwell's departure. They represent nearly 18% of our annual revenue. We're considering options to retain the relationship, including potentially maintaining their custom operational structure as an exception to our broader standardization initiative." And there it was, the real purpose of this meeting. Richard wasn't seeking reconciliation or acknowledging a mistake in terminating me. He was looking for a solution to a business problem that my departure had created. "That's certainly an option," I agreed neutrally. "Though implementation might be challenging given that you've already begun dismantling the custom systems and reassigning the team members who understood its operation." Richard leaned forward, his expression shifting to one I recognized from countless client pitches, earnest, solution-focused, persuasive. "Which brings me to my proposition. We'd like to engage you as a consultant to help us maintain Maxwell's operational structure during this transition period. You designed the system. You understand its nuances better than anyone. It would be a limited engagement, 3 months, possibly extending to 6, with very favorable terms." The offer was both unexpected and entirely predictable. Richard needed a quick solution to the Maxwell problem, and I represented the path of least resistance. The business logic was sound from his perspective. A consulting fee would be far less costly than losing Maxwell's substantial revenue. "That's an interesting proposition," I replied carefully. "However, there's a complication you may not be aware of. I've already accepted a consultancy with Maxwell Electronics, advising them on the development of internal marketing operations capabilities." Richard's expression froze, the practiced professional mask slipping to reveal genuine shock. "You're consulting for Maxwell? Since when?" "Since shortly after my termination," I answered. "They approached me about helping them build internal capabilities. Given that I was no longer employed by Horizon and they were contemplating changes to their agency relationships, there were no conflicts of interest." Richard's mind was visibly processing this new information, recalculating his approach in real time. "I see. That complicates things." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I have to say, Sarah, the timing seems rather convenient. You begin consulting for our largest client, and suddenly they terminate their contract with us." The insinuation was both predictable and disappointing. Rather than acknowledging the causal relationship between Horizon's strategic decisions and Maxwell's response, Richard was looking for an external explanation, a way to frame Maxwell's departure as something other than a natural consequence of his own actions. Maxwell made their decision based on their business requirements, I stated firmly. They determined that Horizon's new standardized approach wouldn't meet their needs. That decision was entirely independent of my consultancy, which focuses on building their internal capabilities, not on their agency relationships. Richard's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he was too skilled a negotiator to press an unproductive line of inquiry. Regardless of the sequence of events, we find ourselves in a challenging position. Maxwell is a valued client that we don't want to lose. If maintaining their custom operational structure would help retain the relationship, we're prepared to make that accommodation. That would be a significant reversal of your standardization strategy, I observed. How would Marcus feel about such an exception? A flicker of discomfort crossed Richard's face at the mention of Marcus. Marcus understands that business sometimes requires flexibility. The executive team is united in wanting to retain Maxwell's business. I took a sip of my coffee, considering the implications of Richard's apparent willingness to undermine his own strategic initiative to keep Maxwell. The decision reflected both the financial significance of the account and perhaps a recognition that the standardization approach might have more significant consequences than initially anticipated. I appreciate your willingness to adapt, I said. However, I'm not in a position to help implement that adaptation. My commitment to Maxwell creates a direct conflict of interest with any consulting work for Horizon. Richard's expression hardened slightly. You're choosing to help them leave rather than helping us retain them. I'm honoring a professional commitment I've already made, I corrected. And more fundamentally, I'm respecting Maxwell's right to determine their own marketing operations approach, whether that includes Horizon or not. Richard sat back, studying me with a mixture of frustration and reluctant respect. You've changed, Sarah. 3 weeks ago, you would have approached this as a problem to solve for Horizon's benefit. 3 weeks ago, I was Horizon's chief operations officer, dedicated to the company's success, I replied evenly. Your decision to terminate that relationship necessarily changed my professional priorities and obligations. A brief silence fell between us as Richard absorbed this reality. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from persuasion to pragmatic negotiation. What if we were to discuss your return to Horizon, not as a consultant, but in your previous capacity as COO, with expanded authority over operational approaches, including the discretion to maintain custom systems where strategically appropriate? The offer caught me by surprise. Richard wasn't merely seeking a quick fix to the Maxwell problem. He was floating the possibility of reversing my termination entirely. The proposition was a significant concession, an implicit acknowledgement that the decision to remove me had been, at minimum, premature. You fired me because my operational philosophy no longer aligned with Horizon's strategic direction, I reminded him. That philosophical misalignment hasn't changed. You still believe in standardization as the path forward. I still believe in tailored operational design for complex client needs. Richard's response was immediate and revealing. Strategic directions can evolve based on market feedback. If maintaining certain custom operational approaches proves necessary for key client relationships, we can adjust our standardization initiative accordingly. In that moment, I saw Richard, with perfect clarity, not as the visionary leader or trusted partner I had once believed him to be, but as a pragmatic businessman adapting to changing circumstances. My termination hadn't been personal, it had been a business calculation. My potential rehiring wasn't personal either. It was simply another calculation now that the variables had changed. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm not interested in returning to Horizon. My consultancy with Maxwell is just the beginning of a new professional direction that I find compelling. While I valued my 12 years building Horizon's operational capabilities, that chapter has closed. Richard's expression revealed genuine surprise. He had clearly expected me to jump at the opportunity to reclaim my position and status. "This is about more than the Maxwell account for you, isn't it?" "It is," I confirmed. "Your decision 3 weeks ago forced me to reevaluate my professional path. That reevaluation has led me to opportunities and possibilities I might never have considered otherwise. In an unexpected way, my termination may prove to have been a catalyst for positive change." "And there's nothing I can say to change your mind?" Richard asked, the practiced negotiator making one final attempt. "There isn't," I replied with certainty. "But I can offer some professional advice if you're interested." Richard nodded, resignation giving way to pragmatic attention. "I'm listening." Maxwell values their custom operational structure because it addresses their specific needs. If you want to retain them, you need to understand those needs at a fundamental level, not just as a series of process requirements. The system works because it was designed around their organizational reality, not imposed as an external framework. "That's always been your strength," Richard acknowledged, seeing the human systems beneath the process requirements. "It's a perspective that has value," I agreed. "One that Horizon may want to reconsider as you evaluate the broader implications of your standardization initiative." As our meeting concluded and we prepared to leave, Richard made one final observation. "You seem different, Sarah. More definitive." "Clarity of purpose is a powerful thing," I replied. "When you removed my institutional identity, you inadvertently helped me discover my professional identity independent of Horizon. That's actually something I should thank you for." Walking away from the cafe, I felt an unexpected lightness, a sense of closure regarding my Horizon chapter that had been missing since my termination. Richard's offer to return should have been validating, a confirmation of my value. Instead, it had confirmed something more significant. I had already moved beyond needing Horizon's validation. The consultancy with Maxwell was progressing well, with executive support and growing momentum. Jeremy's offer of a permanent position provided a stable option if I wanted it. And the seed of an idea for a specialized marketing operations consultancy continued developing in my mind, a potential business that would allow me to implement my operational philosophy across multiple organizations. Richard's outreach had been intended to solve his Maxwell problem. Instead, it had helped me clarify my post-Horizon direction and confirm that I was moving forward rather than looking back. The conversation represented not reconciliation, but resolution. Not a return to what had been but a confirmation of what could be. As I drove to Maxwell's offices for an afternoon working session with their marketing team, I found myself genuinely excited about the possibilities ahead. The path remained uncertain in its specifics, but the direction was increasingly clear. Forward into a professional identity defined by my expertise and philosophy, rather than by organizational affiliation. The message from Lisa was waiting when I checked my phone upon arriving at Maxwell. Emergency all hands called for 4 p.m. Rumors flying about Maxwell account and major strategic shift. What's happening? I chose not to respond immediately. Whatever. Richard was planning to communicate to Horizon staff about Maxwell or potential strategic adjustments. It would unfold according to its own logic. My focus now was on delivering value to Maxwell and developing my own professional future, a future that looked increasingly promising with each passing day. As I entered the project room where Melissa and her team were waiting, I set aside thoughts of Richard, Horizon, and what might have been. The whiteboards were filled with process maps and organizational structures, the tangible manifestations of a new operational approach taking shape under my guidance. This was where my energy belonged now, not in revisiting the past, but in creating something new. "Ready to tackle approval workflows?" Melissa asked as I settled at the table. "Absolutely," I replied with genuine enthusiasm. "I have some ideas I think could transform how we manage complex approvals across divisions." And with that, I turned fully toward the future, leaving Richard and his belated recognition of my value firmly in the past where they belonged. 3 weeks into my consultancy with Maxwell Electronics, the initial assessment phase was nearing completion. What had begun as a strategic advisory project had evolved into a comprehensive operational redesign, with Maxwell's leadership increasingly invested in building robust internal capabilities. The project room walls were now covered with workflow diagrams, staffing models, and implementation timelines. The tangible manifestations of a new organizational approach taking shape under my guidance. That morning, as I reviewed the draft, assessment report that would be presented to Maxwell's executive committee the following week, Jeremy stopped by the project room unexpectedly. "Got a minute?" he asked, gesturing toward the small conference room adjacent to our workspace. Once we were seated, Jeremy placed a tablet on the table between us. "I thought you might find this interesting," he said, sliding it toward me. On the screen was a press release from Horizon Digital Marketing announcing a strategic refinement of their operational approach. The carefully crafted statement outlined Horizon's commitment to balanced operational methodology that would combine standardized efficiencies with customized solutions for complex client requirements. The release specifically mentioned their ongoing work with enterprise clients with sophisticated approval structures and multi-divisional marketing operations, a thinly veiled reference to Maxwell without naming them directly. "They're positioning to keep your business," I observed neutrally. "They're trying," Jeremy confirmed. "Richard called me personally yesterday to discuss their evolved approach to our account. He emphasized their willingness to maintain our custom operational structure as an exception to their broader standardization initiative." The timing confirmed my suspicions about Richard's meeting with me. He had approached Maxwell with this revised position immediately after our conversation, hoping to salvage the relationship despite my unwillingness to help implement the solution. "And your response?" I asked, curious about Maxwell's position given this potential option to maintain the status quo. "I told him we're proceeding with our internal capabilities development," Jeremy replied. "But we'd consider Horizon for creative execution if they can demonstrate compatibility with our new operational approach." It was a diplomatic response that kept options open while maintaining Maxwell's commitment to the internal operations initiative we were developing. Smart business practice, particularly given the complexity and risk involved in agency transitions. "That's going to put pressure on their standardization strategy," I noted. "Making exceptions for major clients inevitably creates operational tension, especially when the broader organization is moving in a different direction." Jeremy studied me for a moment. "You're not surprised by their change in position?" "Not entirely," I admitted. "Richard approached me last week about potentially consulting for Horizon to help maintain Maxwell's custom structure. When I explained that I was already committed to this project with you, he even floated the possibility of returning to my previous role with expanded authority over operational approaches." Jeremy's eyebrows raised slightly. "He offered to rehire you after terminating you just weeks ago?" "Business pragmatism," I explained. "Maxwell represents a significant portion of Horizon's revenue. Losing the account would have material financial implications and potentially signal problems to other clients with complex operations." "And you declined," Jeremy observed rather than asked. "I did," I confirmed. "My focus is on this project and my evolving professional direction." Jeremy nodded thoughtfully. "Which brings me to the other reason I wanted to speak with you today. The executive committee reviewed your preliminary assessment yesterday. They were extremely impressed with both the analysis and the proposed operational framework." "I'm glad it resonated with them," I replied. "The detailed recommendations in the final report will provide a comprehensive roadmap for implementation." "That's precisely what I wanted to discuss," Jeremy continued. "Given the positive reception and the clear value of your approach, we'd like to formalize our interest in having you lead the implementation phase personally." not just as a consultant, but as Maxwell's Chief Marketing Operations Officer, the position we discussed earlier. He slid a folder across the table that I hadn't initially noticed. This contains a formal offer letter outlining the position, compensation package, and reporting structure. The role would report directly to me, with full authority over the design and implementation of our marketing operations capabilities. I opened the folder, scanning the document inside. The offer was indeed substantial, a base salary exceeding my Horizon compensation by nearly 30%, plus performance bonuses, equity grants, and comprehensive benefits. The position would place me on Maxwell's executive leadership team, with responsibility for building and managing the new marketing operations department. This is certainly generous, I acknowledged, continuing to review the details. And I'm honored by your confidence in my capabilities. It's not just confidence, Jeremy clarified. It's recognition of demonstrated value. Your consultancy has already transformed how our leadership thinks about marketing operations. Bringing that expertise in-house permanently would represent a significant competitive advantage for Maxwell. The offer was compelling in many ways: financial security, executive status, institutional support for implementing my operational philosophy. After the upheaval of my Horizon termination, it presented a clear path forward with a respected organization that valued my approach. Yet, as I considered the opportunity, I found myself hesitating for reasons that weren't immediately clear. The position aligned with my expertise, offered substantial rewards, and would allow me to build something meaningful. By conventional metrics, it represented an excellent next step in my career progression. I'd like some time to consider the offer carefully, I said, closing the folder. This represents a significant commitment for both parties. Of course, Jeremy agreed readily. Take the time you need to evaluate it properly. The offer doesn't expire until after the final assessment presentation next week. As I returned to the project room after our conversation, I found myself reflecting on my unexpected hesitation. The Maxwell position offered everything I might have wanted in a corporate role: authority, resources, executive support, and freedom to implement my operational philosophy. Yet something about it felt incomplete, as if accepting it would close a door to a possibility I hadn't fully explored. That evening, as I reviewed the offer details at my dining room table, the source of my hesitation gradually crystallized. The Maxwell position would allow me to implement my operational approach within a single organization, valuable work with significant impact. But the insights I had gained through my Horizon experience and Maxwell consultancy suggested a broader opportunity. The tension between standardized and customized operational approaches wasn't unique to Horizon and Maxwell. It represented a fundamental challenge across the marketing landscape, as organizations struggled to balance efficiency with effectiveness in increasingly complex environments. Agencies pursued standardization for scalability, while clients required customization for their specific organizational realities, a misalignment that created consistent friction in agency-client relationships. This gap between standardized agency offerings and customized client needs represented a market opportunity that extended beyond any single corporate role. The consultancy model I had begun with Maxwell could potentially scale to serve multiple organizations facing similar challenges, providing specialized expertise in designing and implementing custom marketing operations without the constraints of agency profit models or corporate standardization mandates. The concept had been forming in my mind since my termination, but Jeremy's formal offer forced me to consider it more concretely. Did I want to build operational capabilities within a single organization, or did I want to build a business focused on helping multiple organizations develop such capabilities? I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Preston Operations Consultancy, Business Concept. For the next several hours, I explored the potential structure, service offerings, target clients, and competitive positioning for a specialized consultancy focused exclusively on marketing operations design and implementation. The model that emerged was distinct from traditional agency offerings or general management consultancies. It would focus specifically on the intersection of marketing operations and organizational design, helping companies develop customized, operational capabilities that reflected their unique requirements rather than imposing standardized approaches. The core value proposition was compelling: specialized expertise in an increasingly critical function, without the conflicting priorities of creative agencies or the generalized approach of management consultants. The model could start lean, with me as the principal consultant and targeted contractors for specialized functions, gradually expanding as client engagements grew. As I developed the concept further, my energy and excitement built. This wasn't merely a reaction to my horizon, termination, or a compromise position until something better emerged. It represented a genuine opportunity to create something uniquely valuable. A business built around my operational philosophy and expertise, unconstrained by corporate politics or conflicting strategic priorities. The Maxwell consultancy had inadvertently served as a proof of concept, demonstrating both the market need and the value clients placed on specialized operational expertise. Jeremy's willingness to create an executive position specifically for this function further validated the strategic importance of marketing operations in complex organizations. By midnight, I had outlined a comprehensive business plan: service offerings, target market, positioning strategy, operational requirements, and financial projections. The concept was ambitious but grounded in my direct experience and observed market needs. It would require significant effort to launch and substantial risk compared to accepting Maxwell's secure corporate position, but the potential for impact and growth was considerably greater. As I finally prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. Horizon announced operational realignment today. Marcus reportedly furious about strategic adjustments to standardization initiative. Brian looking increasingly uncomfortable. Thought you'd want to know things are unraveling. The message confirmed what I had suspected after seeing Maxwell's press release. Richard's attempt to retain Maxwell by compromising the standardization approach was creating internal tension at Horizon. Marcus had championed standardization as the path to efficiency and scalability. Exceptions for major clients undermined the entire strategic premise. While I took no pleasure in Horizon's challenges, the situation reinforced my emerging business concept. Organizations were struggling to find the right balance between standardization and customization in their marketing operations, a tension that created opportunity for specialized expertise like mine. The next morning, I arrived at Maxwell's offices with a new perspective on my consultancy work. While continuing to focus on delivering exceptional value to Maxwell, I now viewed the engagement through the lens of my emerging business concept, not just as a standalone project, but as the foundation for a broader entrepreneurial direction. During a working lunch with Melissa and 2 members of her team, I found myself observing the engagement from this dual perspective, fulfilling my current obligations while mentally noting approaches and insights that could apply to future clients in similar situations. Your framework for approval workflows is revolutionary, Melissa commented as we reviewed the latest process maps. It maintains compliance requirements while eliminating the bottlenecks that typically create delays. How did you develop this approach? It evolved through years of working with complex approval environments, I explained. The key insight was recognizing that approvals aren't just procedural checkpoints. They're expressions of organizational authority, risk management, and strategic priorities. When you design workflows that reflect those underlying concerns rather than simply mapping formal processes, you can create systems that achieve the necessary governance while maintaining operational momentum. This philosophy, seeing operational systems as expressions of organizational realities rather than abstract efficiency metrics, had always been central to my approach at Horizon. Now, it was becoming the core differentiator for my emerging business concept. a perspective that distinguished my approach from standard agency operations or generic management consulting. As the day continued, I found my thinking increasingly divided between my Maxwell responsibilities and my potential entrepreneurial direction. The consultancy was going exceptionally well, with clear value being delivered and strong client satisfaction. Jeremy's executive position offer represented validation of that value and a secure path forward. Yet the entrepreneurial concept continued to gain momentum in my mind, representing not just a career option, but a genuine market opportunity that aligned perfectly with my expertise and professional philosophy. The decision I faced wasn't simply about choosing between two good options. It was about determining what kind of professional legacy I wanted to build. By the time I left Maxwell's offices that evening, a clarity had begun to emerge. While I hadn't yet decided definitively on Jeremy's offer, I was increasingly convinced that my professional future lay in building something of my own rather than joining another corporate structure, however appealing. The recognition of this preference felt significant, a shift from reactive career navigation following my termination to proactive direction setting based on personal vision. As I drove home, a call came through on my car's Bluetooth system. The display showed Richard Blackwood, an unexpected contact given our previous conversation's definitive conclusion. After a moment's hesitation, I accepted the call. Sarah. Richard began without preamble. I wanted to update you personally. We've announced some refinements to our operational strategy at Horizon, focusing on balanced approaches that combine standardization with customization where appropriate. I saw the press release, I replied neutrally. Sounds like a significant adjustment to the standardization initiative. Strategic evolution, Richard corrected, ever conscious of narrative framing. The market is providing feedback, and we're responding accordingly. Which brings me to the reason for my call. Our conversation last week clarified that returning to your previous role isn't of interest, but I'm wondering if you might reconsider a consulting arrangement to help us implement this evolved approach. The request was both predictable and revealing. Richard needed my expertise to execute the strategic pivot, to reconcile standardization with the custom approaches required by clients like Maxwell. The operational tension this created was precisely the market gap my business concept was designed to address. I appreciate the interest, I replied, but my schedule is fully committed for the next several months. We could work around your availability, Richard pressed. Even limited advisory capacity would be valuable given your insights into these operational challenges. In that moment, something crystallized in my understanding. Not just about Richard's request, but about my own professional direction. Richard was seeking my expertise as a temporary solution to an immediate problem. What I was contemplating? Building was a business specifically designed to address such challenges as its core function, not as a side engagement or temporary fix. Richard, I said with newfound clarity, what you're describing is exactly the type of operational challenge that requires specialized focus, the balance between standardization and customization in complex marketing environments. It's a fundamental tension in our industry that deserves dedicated expertise, not piecemeal consulting. That's precisely why we'd value your perspective, he replied, missing my broader point. I understand, I continued, but I'm developing a different approach to these challenges. One that goes beyond individual consulting engagements to address this industry-wide need more systematically. There was a brief silence as Richard processed my response. You're starting your own business, he concluded, his tone suggesting he'd just solved a puzzle. I'm exploring that possibility, I confirmed, the first time I had acknowledged the direction aloud to anyone else. Focusing specifically on marketing operations, designed for complex organizational environments, helping companies develop systems that balance efficiency with their unique requirements. The statement felt both declarative and liberating, a public commitment to a vision that had been forming since my termination. By articulating it to Richard of all people, I had moved the concept from private consideration to stated intention. That's... Richard paused, clearly recalibrating his response. That's actually brilliant positioning. There's a clear market need that neither agencies nor general consultancies are addressing effectively. His assessment, while self-interested, validated my market analysis. Richard understood the industry landscape well enough to recognize the opportunity I was describing. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciating his professional insight. Despite our complex history, it's still in development, but the concept is compelling. Would Horizon potentially be a client of this new venture? Richard asked, ever the pragmatist. The question made me smile despite myself. Barely 3 weeks after terminating me for my operational approach, Richard was inquiring about potentially hiring that same approach through my new business. Potentially, I allowed, once the business is established and assuming no conflicts of interest with other client engagements. As the call concluded and I continued my drive home, I felt an unexpected shift in my emotional state, a clarity and purpose that had been building gradually, but now seemed fully formed. The conversation with Richard, intended from his perspective to secure consulting help for Horizon, had instead helped solidify my own entrepreneurial direction. The decision about Jeremy's executive offer wasn't fully resolved, but my preference was becoming increasingly clear. While the corporate role offered security and institutional support, building my own specialized consultancy represented an opportunity to create something uniquely valuable that extended beyond any single organization. What had begun as a response to unexpected termination was evolving into something far more significant, not merely a career transition, but the foundation of a business built around my professional philosophy and expertise. The realization was both exhilarating and sobering, representing both tremendous opportunity and substantial risk. As I pulled into my condominium garage, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing in the initial aftermath of my Horizon termination. The path forward wasn't yet fully defined, but the direction was increasingly clear, not back to another corporate role, regardless of its apparent advantages, but forward into building something that was uniquely mine. The following morning, I arrived at Maxwell's offices with renewed focus and clarity. While continuing to advance the consultancy deliverables, I reserved an hour during lunch to refine my business concept. In a quiet corner of Maxwell's cafeteria, I created a detailed action plan for the potential launch of Preston Operations Consultancy. The plan identified key milestones across various dimensions: business structure, service offerings, operational requirements, marketing strategy, and financial projections. For each milestone, I defined specific actions, resource requirements, and tentative timelines. The exercise transformed what had been an exciting but abstract concept into a concrete roadmap for implementation. Mid-afternoon, Melissa joined me in the project room for our scheduled review of the approval workflow redesign. As we discussed the proposed changes, I found myself observing our interaction through an entrepreneurial lens, not just as a consultant executing a specific assignment, but as a potential business owner defining a distinctive service approach. What impresses me most about this framework, Melissa noted as we reviewed the workflow diagrams, is how it anticipates potential breakdown points before they occur. Most operational systems I've encountered are designed for ideal scenarios, not for the messiness of actual organizational behavior. Her observation captured exactly what had always differentiated my approach to operations, designing for organizational realities rather than theoretical efficiencies. This perspective would become a core differentiator for my consultancy if I proceeded with the business launch. Organizational systems are ultimately human systems, I explained. They need to accommodate how people actually work, communicate, and make decisions, not how we might wish they would in an ideal environment. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. That's precisely what made your original system at Horizon so effective. For us, it worked with our organizational structure rather than imposing a standardized process that ignored our complexity. The validation reinforced my growing conviction about the market opportunity. Organizations with complex marketing operations needed systems designed for their specific requirements, an approach that traditional agencies increasingly abandoned in favor of standardization, and that general management consultancies lacked the specialized expertise to provide effectively. After completing the workflow review, I returned to my temporary office at Maxwell to prepare for the following day's executive presentation. The draft assessment report was nearly complete, requiring only final revisions and formatting before submission. As I worked, Jeremy stopped by unexpectedly. "How's the presentation coming along?" he asked, taking a seat across from my desk. "Final touches being applied now," I assured him. "We'll be ready for tomorrow's executive committee meeting." "Excellent," he replied, then shifted to a more personal tone. "Have you had a chance to consider our offer?" The question wasn't unexpected, though I hadn't planned to address it before the final assessment presentation. Jeremy's direct inquiry required a thoughtful response that balanced honesty with appropriate timing. "I have been considering it seriously," I acknowledged. "The position presents a compelling opportunity to build something significant at Maxwell. However, I'm also exploring another professional direction that I'd like to discuss with you after tomorrow's presentation, once the assessment phase is formally complete." Jeremy studied me for a moment, clearly curious but professional enough not to press for details prematurely. "Fair enough. I look forward to both the presentation and that subsequent conversation." As he left, I reflected on the approaching decision point. The executive presentation would complete my initial commitment to Maxwell, formally concluding the assessment phase of the consultancy. Whatever direction I chose next, accepting Maxwell's executive offer or pursuing my own business, would represent a definitive step rather than a transitional response to my Horizon termination. That evening, I invited Lisa to dinner at Riverview, a quiet restaurant overlooking the city's waterfront. In the 6 weeks since my departure from Horizon, we had maintained regular contact, with Lisa providing updates on the evolving situation while I offered occasional guidance on navigating the changing environment. This dinner, however, had a different purpose: to explore possibilities that extended beyond Horizon's organizational boundaries. "I'm considering launching my own consultancy," I explained once we had ordered, sharing the concept I had been developing. "Focused specifically on marketing operations design for complex organizational environments. The industry needs an alternative to standardized agency models and generalized management consultancies that lacks genuine specialization in marketing operations." Lisa's eyes widened with interest. "That's actually brilliant positioning. You'd be addressing exactly the gap that's causing friction between agencies like Horizon and clients like Maxwell." "That's my thinking," I confirmed. "The Maxwell consultancy has essentially served as a proof of concept, demonstrating both the market need and the value clients place on specialized operational expertise." Lisa considered this for a moment, taking a thoughtful sip of her wine. "And where do I fit in this vision? I assume you didn't invite me to dinner just to share your business concept." Her directness made me smile. Lisa's analytical clarity had always been one of her strongest professional attributes: the ability to quickly identify core issues beneath surface conversations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.